I also warmly welcome the Noble Baroness Lady Berridge to this very important post and wish her every success in the fulfilment of a very, very important remit. May I also warmly congratulate my noble friend, Lord Harris, for securing this very important debate and for his very powerful opening speech. As your Lordships may be aware, I spend much of my time with my small NGO, Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust, or HART, supporting our partners in remote locations who are generally unreached by major aid organisations for political or security reasons. In seeking to reflect their priorities, I'm very sorry that mine will not be a happy speech, because often Her Majesty's Government has elected to prioritise trade and economic interest over human rights. Time only permits 4 examples. First, the war fought by Azerbaijan to achieve ethnic cleansing of the Armenians in the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, part of historic Armenia relocated by Stalin into Azerbaijan. I was there many times during the war, which occurred between 1990 and 94, and I used to count 400 Grad missiles a day fired by Azerbaijan onto the little small city of Stepanakert, together with low-flying aerial bombardment of civilian targets with massive 500-kilogram bombs. On one visit, I took photographs of children shredded by cluster bombs. I took these photos to a very important senior person in the Foreign Office. When I asked if Her Majesty's Government would make representation to the Government of Azerbaijan to stop dropping cluster bombs on civilians in contravention of international law, I received the reply: "No one has an interest in other countries, only interests. We have oil interests in Azerbaijan. Good morning." Secondly, the present government's refusal to recognise the ongoing and widespread attacks on Christians in Nigeria's northern and central belt states as genocide. The Nigerian House of Representatives has declared recent killings to be genocide, and the statistics are certainly compatible with the definition. The refusal of Her Majesty's Government to recognise this, of course, absolves them of the duties to respond appropriately. In recent years, several thousands of Christian civilians have been slaughtered and over 2 million displaced, following Boko Haram and Fulani insurgencies. Yet our government has not responded with appropriate political or humanitarian support for victims of Fulani attacks and land grabs. In Al Guri IDP camp in Central Belt, we were told, I quote, "In more than 10 years of crisis in Jos, local people observed a connivance of militants with the military on many occasions. For example, the government sent in a helicopter with military and Fulani met them. The Fulani herdsmen now go about with AK-47s. And last year, Nigeria's former Army Chief of Staff and Defence Minister, Lieutenant General Theophilus Danjuma, said the armed forces were, I quote, "not neutral, they collude in the ethnic cleansing in riverine states by Fulani militia." He insisted that villagers must defend themselves because, depending on the armed forces, will result in them dying one by one. The ethnic cleansing must stop. In this context, can the Noble Lady Minister reassure the Nigerian people who are seeking such reassurance about how the United Kingdom will engage with the Nigerian government and balance the conflicting priorities between human rights and other priorities, notably trade? Thirdly, in Sudan, while the notorious ICC-indicted President al-Bashir was in power from 1989 to this year, his regime was responsible for 3 million deaths, 5 million displaced, and tens of thousands of women and children abducted into slavery. Yet last year, the Foreign Office declared it was changing its relationship with Sudan from sticks to carrots, apparently to cooperate with Khartoum to promote its own interests in the region. My Lord, such a change in approach warrants serious scrutiny, not least because it bestowed credibility upon the now deposed president without yielding any tangible results for the United Kingdom or the Sudanese people. I have raised this issue in your Lordship's House, claiming the regime was enjoying munching the carrots, but asking what were the conditions. And may I ask the Noble Lady the Minister, what was the position of Her Majesty's Government regarding the policy of carrots? Presumably partly associated with the promotion of trade with Sudan and its allies, but to do so in the context of continuing offences against civilians. To date, I have received no satisfactory reply. And finally, during my visits to Syria, local people have consistently emphasised their profound concerns of the devastating impact of British foreign policy, including the horrendous effects of sanctions. My Lords, these sanctions greatly harm civilians, for whom it is very difficult to obtain adequate supplies of food, medicines, medical equipment, or employment. The situation has worsened devastatingly, since the crisis was highlighted in the medical journal The Lancet in May 2015. I quote, "The economic losses of the country are, at the end of 2014, stood at $143.8 billion US dollars, with more than 80% of the population living in poverty, of whom a third were in abject poverty, unable to obtain even basic food items. Life expectancy has been reduced from 75.9 years in 2010 to 55.7 years in 2014, a loss of 20 years. The cost of basic food items has risen sixfold since 2010, although it varies regionally. With the exception of drugs for cancer and diabetes, Syria was 95% self-sufficient in terms of drug production before the war. This has virtually collapsed, as have many hospitals and primary healthcare centres. Economic sanctions have not removed the president, and sanctions remain the biggest causes of suffering for the people of Syria. My Lord, given that sanctions are central to the question of trade, is the noble lady minister able to clarify their impact since their imposition in 2012 on the government of Syria and on the economic well-being of Syrian civilians? And does she appreciate that using human rights to justify the imposition of sanctions on weak countries whose governments our government wishes to remove is as bad as subordinating human rights to economic interests? My Lords, in conclusion, we often feel in part that in our work we suffer what I call the double twist of the knife. We return from being with people and witnessing their excruciating pain to raise these tragedies with our own government, which does not want to respond with any assistance. It is the local innocent civilians in these and other countries who suffer the very harsh effects of Her Majesty's government's interest when trade overrides humanitarian aid. I hope very much that this debate will highlight some of these issues for future trade deals and promote policy changes to bring desperately needed help to civilians now in dire need, currently left to suffer as political pawns.